Yeah. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Before we get started talking some hoops, yes, I know it's football season, but the NBA is right around the corner, so we definitely got to start digging in on that. But before we get started, let's go ahead and do what we always do. You know what time it is. Go ahead, if you haven't already on YouTube, and click that subscribe, that like, and that notification bell so you can be notified when new episodes come out and you're always up to date with this content that I'm giving you. Also, if you want the audio only version of the podcast, please go ahead, open up your audio platform, type in the Format Podcast, do a little search, we should come up. Go ahead and subscribe there. If you can, leave us a comment if you like the show, or even if you don't, leave us a comment, that's okay. Here on YouTube, go ahead, leave us a comment in the comment section. All that stuff helps us to rise in the algorithm. Please do, okay? Also, leave us that 5-star review. All that stuff helps more sports fans to find us and helps us to find them, okay? And lastly, if you love the show and you know other sports fans who would love it as well, love that out-of-the-box thinking and not parroting the same old narratives, please go ahead, share it with them so that, again, we can find more sports fans can find us. So let's go ahead and get right to it. All right, so if you've been with me for a while, you guys know that Hakeem Olajuwon is my favorite basketball player of all time. But even besides that, I truly believe he's the 5th best basketball player ever. I know a lot of people think I'm crazy for that, but that's okay. It's my list. And I also believe he is the greatest big man who has ever played. Why do I believe that? Quick rundown. I believe that Hakeem Olajuwon is the greatest combination of strength, skill, speed, and moves that the position of center has ever seen. We have never seen a more complete player on both sides of the ball than Hakeem Olajuwon. Well, as a center. So Hakeem is probably the number 2 most complete player of all time, but in terms of the center position, he's clearly the best two-way. He's the best defender. He's the all-time leading shot blocker. Now, again, they only started counting blocks, I want to say, in 1973 or 74. So if you had gotten all the blocks in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's career, if you had got the blocks in Will Chamberlain's career, as well as in Bill Russell's, Dream might be a lot lower on that list. But as far as the blocks that have been counted, he is number 1 all time. And not just because of the blocks, he's also the only big man that's top 10 in steals. So on the defensive end, Hakeem Olajuwon is that great. And on the offensive end, we have seen what he can do in terms of his just incredible ability to dominate the low post, dominate the mid post, pass out of the post, and just do it all. Just such a complete game. Fundamentals insane, footwork insane. But this show is not to talk about Hakeem Olajuwon. If you want a complete Dream breakdown, I just dropped a short with some of his great moves, and you can go back and look for the whole show where I talk about Hakeem probably being the most disrespected and underappreciated great of all time. But this show is actually about another dominant African center in the NBA. And who is that? That is Joel Embiid, aka The Process. But in my opinion, I call him Dream 2.0. Why do I call Embiid Dream 2.0? I think he's dominant on both sides of the ball, complete, one of the best players in the modern NBA, and realistically, among bigs, he's the most guardable player in today's game. There is no one that can guard him when he gets going. Now, one thing I don't like about him is that you don't see this every game. Some games he seems to kind of take off and be a little lazy in terms of how he plays and not dominating the way he can. But every time you see him in a matchup against another quality big, he just dominates, whether that's Anthony Davis, whether that's Karl Anthony Towns, whether that's Nikola Jokic, who coincidentally beat him out for the MVP last year, but that's a different story. Rudy Gobert. Every time that Embiid is matched up against one of these guys, he just absolutely goes to town on him. He does not take it easy, right? And so why do I call him Dream 2.0? This is a guy that can dominate the glass. He rebounds about as well as a prime Shaq. He's a guy who can dominate the paint defensively. He's a great shot blocker for this era. Now, I know that the shot blocking totals are down in this era, but that's partly because guys are shooting so many more threes that it's harder if you're a big to get to those. As well, he's a guy I think he's multiple times all NBA defensive team. But on the offensive end, you look at a guy who's like Embiid, who's about 7'2", 280 pounds. He's a really big body, but when he gets going, he can run the floor. He can go into the post. Now, with that kind of size in the modern NBA, he's just too big and strong for anybody realistically to guard him. But it's not just that, because when they send double teams, he splits the double teams with ease. If you watch Embiid, and he'll tell you, Olajuwon was his favorite player growing up. He watched a lot of footage.
When I started playing basketball, my coach back home in Cameroon gave me a tape of Hakeem, and I watched that tape at least 6 days out of 7 every week. Just watching him move, it was so amazing. I would just go to the gym, watch whatever move he did, and do it by myself.
But when you watch Embiid, you can see the similarities in terms of the footwork, the ability to really work that pivot foot without traveling, I might add. A lot of guys today have no idea what a pivot foot is. They switch those regularly. But Embiid has a ton of moves on the low block, a lot of stuff reminiscent of Olajuwon. And some ways that he splits the double team is also reminiscent of Celtics great Kevin McHale. His post game is really immaculate. And the funny thing is, it's something he doesn't even necessarily need, being a guy that's bigger and stronger than just about everybody in the modern NBA. But he is a guy that can really pull out a lot of amazing moves and really just go to work on guys. And so, like I said earlier, when he's got it going, when he's in his quote unquote bag, there's nobody in the league that can defend him. I think he's probably one of the top 5 best players in the league, easy. You look at Embiid and, you know, it's so reminiscent of Olajuwon. Like I said, he tells you with no shame that he watched so much Olajuwon footage growing up, really tries to mimic it. One thing I find interesting, though, we know that Olajuwon trains big men, and Embiid says he's never met Dream. So I find that really interesting. But Olajuwon also says himself, well, Dream will tell you.
After people were telling me about him, I saw some YouTube of some of his game, and I was very, very impressed how he was moving. The movement that I know that, wow, I can see myself.
Well, when I watch the two, and I'm a guy that's often critical of today's players and wonder how they would fare back in the day when the NBA was more physical, when the rules were called more tightly, and especially a guy like Embiid, who missed his first 2 years due to injury. And, you know, when the league was so filled with dominant big men, I mean, let's take it back to a year like 1994. You had David Robinson, you had Hakeem Olajuwon, you had Patrick Ewing, you had Shaquille O'Neal, you had Alonzo Mourning, you had Dikembe Mutombo, you had all these elite bigs in the league, and these guys were banging. And then, of course, you had legitimate power forwards who, most of those guys, 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", 240, 260 pounds, you know, muscle-bound guys, your Anthony Masons, your Charles Oakleys, those type of guys. And so in the paint, it was not easy down there. Embiid, providing he could stay healthy, and that's a big providing, because this past season, the 2021-22 season, he played 68 games, which was his career high. He had a lot of career highs. Career high in minutes per game, I think it was like about 33, which I don't know if that speaks to his organization protecting him, or there were a lot of games that the Sixers were winning and had well in hand, so, you know, he didn't have to continue to play. But you look at a guy like Embiid, and I often wonder, how would he have fared back then when there were so many elite bigs in the league? And while I don't think in that era he would have been an elite big, I definitely believe he would have been serviceable, maybe an 18 or 20 points per game guy and a 10 rebounds per game guy, but who knows? And again, if you look at Embiid and then you look at Dream, and you're like, wow, even though, you know, Embiid is so much big, he's a lot bigger than Dream. I think he outweighs him by about 40 pounds. He's about 3 inches, 4 inches taller, but the fluidity with which he moves, not quite like Dream, but for a guy his size, he has a lot of fluidity in terms of his moves and the way he can go to different things, different fakes. He's got the fadeaways, he's got the up and unders, he's got step throughs. You know, he's really got counters for defense. He can split a double team very easily. It's really impressive, and I love to watch Embiid play, which in a way really sucks for me because I'm a diehard Celtics fan, have been since the 80s. So, you know, rooting for a Sixer is kind of not cool. But just as a fan of the game of basketball itself and a fan of traditional big men, watching what Embiid can do, I think is just super, super impressive. I think the guy has all the talent in the world, at least for this era. The key for him is going to be a couple of things, right? One is obviously to stay healthy and not get hurt again. He needs to be able to play probably 70 games or more. I think, if he could play 75 games, I think there's no question he could win the MVP. 75 games at 36 minutes per game, he would be the MVP. even playing 68 games last year at 33 minutes per game, he was runner-up to Jokic. I think he probably should have won it, but Jokic's assist numbers are kind of, I think, what grabbed people from the center position, him playing like a point center role on the Nuggets team. So it's no disrespect to Jokic. I just think, I don't know that when you look at a guy like Jokic, you can say, and don't get me wrong, his fundamentals are solid. He's another guy with a really good post game, can shoot the three, all that. But can you really go to him on the low block and say, get a bucket? Probably better than most of the bigs in this era, because bigs in this era are not really taught the back to the basket game. But since Jokic is European, he learned under a kind of different system. But you look at Embiid, you can definitely tell him in this day and age and in this game, go to the block, get a bucket. Now, for me, something I've often complained about with previous Sixers coaches, as well as Doc Rivers now, I've always felt like, and again, this is my old school coming out, but I'm a big proponent of every single play down the floor. If Embiid's on the floor, I'm telling him, get your butt on the block and let's start the play from you in the post, because nobody's going to guard you. So you're either going to score or you're going to get fouled, or you're going to score and get fouled. And for a big, Embiid shooting almost 82% from the free throw line, you can't foul this guy as a weapon. You can't, because he can knock those things down. I think year before last, he shot 84.5%, almost 85. This past season, he shot almost 82. So putting him on the line that's not a weapon, right? He's not a liability from the stripe. So that's a guy that I would be telling, if I was his coach, every single play, get down there. If they double and triple team you, okay, now you have to work to recognize where that stuff is coming from, and pass out of it. Especially when you got a guy like James Harden on the outside who can also distribute the ball, right? Make sure you got shooters around him. Really, I don't know why you wouldn't, if you got an Embiid, try and mimic what the Houston Rockets did back in 94 and 95. They won a championship playing that way. Yes, I know the modern NBA is different, but with the way they're shooting the three, and the Houston Rockets back then were kind of an early precursor of this. They shot a lot of threes for that era, you know, with Kenny Smith and Matt Bullard and even Clyde Drexler and Sam Cassell off the bench and Big Shot Bob, Robert Horry. All those guys were shooting threes. So why can't you do that with Embiid? He can dominate on the low block. He can go to the line. He can score in the mid-range. He's one of the best mid-range scorers in the entire NBA, even though the stat nerds and the analytics geeks would have you believe that the mid-range shot is a terrible shot. Same way they'd have you believe that a back-to-the-basket post-up is a terrible shot. Don't believe it, okay? Don't believe it. If you can dominate in whatever you're doing, go ahead and do that. Look at what DeMar DeRozan does in the mid-range. He's a killer, right? Anyway, I say that to say if guys will work on this stuff more, it wouldn't be bad shots. That's it, plain and simple. It can't just be dunk or a three. Like, that's really stupid. But I'm getting on my soapbox here. Anyway, getting back to Embiid, I definitely would say get on the block. Every single possession is going to start with trying to force the ball inside to you, right? And teams are either going to adjust and make us beat them another way, or you're going to beat them that way. So, I mean, it seems to me too easy. But yeah, you look at Embiid, and you can clearly see the Olajuwon influence. You can see his reverence for Dream. You know, you can see the work that he's put in to become a dominant low post scorer, and it's totally impressive, and I love it. I'm a big fan of Embiid. Can't wait to see him play more this year, and that's all I got. So again, make sure you go ahead, click that like and subscribe button. I'll be looking out for you, and I'm out. Peace.